Welcome to another jazz session at Pace Studios. I'm your host, Bill Mulkowski. And today we have two very special guests who are participants in a wonderful new album that came out on the Blue Engine Records label. It's called Handful of Keys, and it traces 100 years of jazz piano with the Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra under the direction of trumpeter Wynton Marsalis. This exemplary young man that we have here, Isaiah Thompson, is one of the participants. We also have Helen Sung. She'll come up a little bit later. Isaiah is a New Jersey native, and he's in his third year at Juilliard. He's been called one of a handful of young musicians on the scene today that can fully embrace the past while at the same time push his music into the future with clarity and vision. On this great recording, he plays Lulu's Back in Town, which is a tune. Originally, I guess Fats Waller played that tune or recorded it in 35, something like that.
Exactly, yeah, 1935.
Yeah, now that's an interesting tune because Thelonious Monk also did a version that sort of bridges the whole aesthetic of Fats into Monk. And can you talk about that tune and their different interpretations of it?
Completely. I mean, Fats plays it in E flat usually, and that's usually the way it was played. And but Monk, the way he interprets the melody, he changes some melody notes to fit into the way that he likes to play. He plays with a lot of with whole tone sounding things, and I transcribed the way that he played it. At first, Mr. Marsalis, one of the first times I met him, he told me to look at the record. It's Monk's Time, which Luda's Back in Town is the first track on that album. And he originally told me to look at Stuffy Turkey, which is also a beautiful song on that album. And I really found, after I listened to Luda's Back in Town, I was like, wow, I've never heard something like that. I didn't really understand the sophistication of Monk until I listened to that record. So watching him and then watching him play that, like I've seen live performances of him, and then transcribing it, and then being able to play with the orchestra really allowed me to kind of grasp what he was trying to get at. So.
Right, and Monk kind of alludes to stride on his rendition of that, but then, of course, he takes it somewhere else.
Right, and in the very beginning, he plays like a few courses, just stride piano, and then later the band comes in. And I thought that was amazing.
Yeah, now on the recording, of course, which took place, it was a live recording that was done at Frederick Rose Hall at the Jazz at Lincoln Center, Wynton's beloved House of Swing. Mm-hmm. You play with the full orchestra with Wynton, but today we have the pleasure of hearing you break this down into a solo rendition. Can you play that for us and see what kind of spin you put on it?
I can do it.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thanks.
incredibly mature beyond your 20 years.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I could hear the ebullient spirit of Fats and the irreverent spirit of Monk in there. Plus, he had your own arrangement on it. You must have gone to school on that piece and came up with something as wonderful as you just played.
It's a little different every time. I was proud of myself, but yeah, I worked on it, and I really wanted to get inside the mind of Monk specifically, and just try to figure out what kind of things he would do and how that can influence how I'm going to play in the future, how I'm going to play now. Yeah.
When you think about Monk, do you think about his harmonic innovations or rhythmic, or what is it about him that jumps out to you?
Well, this year specifically, I did a lot of composing, and so looking at Monk, a lot of his songs are just as rhythmically strong as they are harmonically strong. So sometimes you can't really play his songs without playing both of them completely accurately. So from him, I think it's about embracing the rhythmic and harmonic aspect of your playing, trying to figure out how one influences the other and how you can play with both.
Beautiful. Now, I understand that you began studying classical piano at the age of 5.
Yeah, I played classical when I was really young. My parents wanted me to be a well-rounded individual, because I'm an individual first and musician second. That's just what I believe. And so I fenced in high school. I swam competitively when I was young, and I went to a lot of basketball camps. I did a lot of things. My parents wanted me to be occupied, wanted me to surround myself with different people, different activities. So my dad and both my parents, they wanted me to play piano, and so they put me in a classical school in the beginning. And from that, I went to another school, and a private school in New Jersey, and a teacher by the name of Bob McCooley passed away, but he introduced me to people like Herbie Hancock and to pop music and to other forms of jazz, R&B, and from there I started getting into programs like Jazz House Kids, which I'm so grateful to have been a part of, run by Mr. McBride and his wife, Miss Melissa Walker. And so glad that they showed me, these different people showed me how to get into jazz, like what it's about. And from there, learning about Jazz Lincoln Center through essentially Ellington and the different programs they have, the Summer Jazz Academy, I could name all of them.
Wow. So how old were you when you got involved with Jazz House Kids?
I did their summer camp when I was in middle school, I believe. That's when I first found out about them. And a lot of their students ended up going to Juilliard and different great schools for music, great schools for jazz, and yeah.
So was that a big leap for you to go from Jazz House for Kids to Lincoln Center Youth Orchestra?
Well, I would say Jazz House definitely prepared me for things like that. Things like the programs that Jazz Lincoln Center had. Being around Mr. Marsalis, he opened my mind to a lot of different things, like Thelonious Monk. He was the first one to really tell me the importance of this person in the music. But I'm so thankful to Jazz House and to Jazz Lincoln Center for teaching me and providing support for me, showing me about jazz.
Okay, now on the recording, you also played a second tune, "Hymn to Freedom," which is a Oscar Peterson composition. Can you talk about the significance of that piece and when it was written by him, and how you wanted to interpret that very important piece?
Sure. That piece is on Night Train. I believe it was recorded in 1963. And Oscar Peterson was my first love. He was the first person I listened to, and I said, "Wow, how do you do that?" I want to sound like that. Just the soulfulness, just everything about his playing is just amazing. And so when I heard a record, Night Train, I fell in love with it automatically. And then learning about how it's an anthem for the civil rights movement, and a lot of songs also are, but that one's particularly stuck with me. In middle school, I had an iPod full of songs like "Hymn to Freedom" and Bill Evans Trio and things like that, and I didn't really understand the significance of them. They were just on there. They would just come on. I would hardly ever listen to a whole album, just random songs. But later on, I got to thinking I should probably listen to the whole album, really understand what's going on. And that's when I realized, wow, I've been listening to this for years, but this is the first time I actually listened to it.
So, in your interpretation of Hymn to Freedom, what did you want to bring to it to make it your own?
Well, I just wanted to kind of capture that soul that Oscar Peterson plays with, the patience that he plays with a song like that, and I wanted to, I was glad that I could be featured on a song like that with the orchestra, and yes, sir.
Great. So, can we hear it?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. beautiful.
Thank you.
Isaiah J. Thompson. IJT?
IJT.
There it is.
I appreciate it.
No, man, that was beautiful. Very soulful, very meaningful. I appreciated it. Thanks for coming down to Pay Studios today.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Okay, and next we have Helen Sung, who is a native of Houston, where she attended the high school for the performing arts, performing and visual arts, a very prestigious school, and later studied classical at the University of Texas in Austin. But this was all studying classical music, was it not, Helen? Yeah. Okay. You were a self-described classical nerd, I understand.
Yes, I was. I was the pianist who was always in the practice room and didn't know much about anything else. So I always think it was kind of a miracle that I found my way to jazz, and I'm so grateful because I think it's what happened to me in my life that I call it my musical emancipation, and thereafter personal too.
And I understand there was a particular jazz epiphany that you had that sort of opened the door for you to embrace jazz.
Oh,
Harry Connick Jr.?
Oh, that one. Yes, a friend of mine invited me to his concert. He was in town, and I didn't know who he was, but she said, "Don't worry, he's really cute. You'll like him." And so I went, and he was with his big band, and they were very fun. But what got me was in the middle of the concert, he sat down and played some solo piano, and I remember thinking, I felt like I'd been hit by lightning, and I didn't know you were allowed to play the piano like that.
Wow. So you were a semifinalist in the Thelonious Monk competition in 1999, and you won the Mary Lou Williams Jazz Piano Competition in 2007. You have performed and recorded with Clark Terry, Ron Carter, Wayne Shorter, Terry Lynn Carrington, and of course you have been leading your own trios and quartets. Your most recent album is 2014's Anthem for a New Day on the Concord label. But tell me what it means to be included in this very wonderful project, Handful of Keys.
Well, of course, it's a huge honor, you know. I mean, it was such a special occasion. I think it was just one of those things where the stars aligned to have such a diverse range of folks, and felt like a really unique idea, whoever came up with it. It was such a beautiful thing to hear music spanning the whole history of the piano, really, and to be included in that company. You know, there's so many great pianists they could have chosen, so I just feel very fortunate and really just delighted to be able to revisit the whole experience through this recording.
I should mention that the other four pianists on the recording and at that very special series of evenings at Jazz at Lincoln Center were Joey Alexander, Dick Hyman, Myra Melford, and Dan Nimmer.
And Larry Willis also played.
Yeah, and you chose to play a McCoy Tyner tune, 4x5, which is from his The Real McCoy album, which is a very influential, important album for a lot of pianists.
Well, definitely one of my all-time favorites. It's just such a cohesive, beautiful artistic statement. You know, I was reading up on the background of the album. It was recorded in 1967, not long after he left the Coltrane Quartet. And man, a lot of stuff happened in 67. Mm-hmm. You know, the whole Vietnam War, the race riots, civil rights movement, first Black Supreme Court Justice, Thurgood Marshall was nominated and approved. And so it was a very unsettled time in this country, which I think speaks. They were talking about this in the liner notes, how McCoy was really looking intentionally inward. You know, there are two ballads on this album, Contemplation and Search for Peace. And yes, there's Passion Dance, and yes, there's 4x5, but there's that very, this McCoy, to me, he's so noble. I just feel like his music he's a force of nature. He's a game changer. Mm-hmm. But there's this nobility and majesty to his music. And I think we could use some of that for our times.
Mm. Now, how did you collaborate with Ted Nash, who did the arrangement for the orchestra at that performance.
Oh no, I did the arrangement.
You did.
Actually.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I guess I misread it in the liner notes.
No,
You did
no
the arrangement
worries.
for the orchestra.
Huh?
You did the orchestral arrangement.
I know,
for
isn't that a shocker? I was shocked.
Yeah.
Well, what happened is when they invited me to be a part of it, they had already kind of the usual suspects were already taken in terms of who's going to play what by whom, and I said, you know what, I love McCoy, and then I said, what about this tune? And they said, well, there's no big band arrangement of it. So I was like, can I write it? And I have to, I'd been taking the BMI Jazz Composers Workshop where Ted is a teacher along with James Farber, and I also had a lot of help from the great Alan Ferber, just a lot of pointers, because I don't have that much experience writing it, but they made it sound great. So it was an amazing experience to do that.
I stand corrected. Ted Nash did the arrangement for Myra Malford's
Yes.
piece, The Strawberry.
Yes.
So I was confused.
That's okay.
Let's hear your interpretation of this great McCoy Tyner piece.
Okay.
4x5. It's very dynamic, very powerful performance. I can see where your background in classical and your passion for jazz merge in this interpretation.
Well, gosh, thank you. I mean, playing solo is just such a bear, and I feel like I'm finally starting to make a little bit of peace with it, and in some ways, the aesthetic of jazz is. I wouldn't say the complete opposite, but just the idea of being in the moment and remaining in the moment is something that's so key to this music, and it requires one to live very nakedly and honestly, and that's one thing I love about the music and appreciate so much.
It's so revealing, and you really opened yourself up on that piece.
Oh, thank you.
That was great. Another composer we spoke with, Isaiah, about Thelonious Monk, who has exerted a huge influence on piano players over time, is an important player for you. And of course, this is Monk's centennial. Can you talk about Monk, his influence on you, and perhaps play us a Monk tune?
Sure. I mean, Monk is a true American original. I remember when I first heard it, I was like, what is he doing? But going through the Monk Institute program, of course, we had to learn so much of his music. And as I got to understand this music, just what a genius who he always sounded like himself. I feel like there are parallels between him and McCoy, because McCoy came to something that's different, that was him, and that changed how pianists play. And Monk, he never sounded like anybody but himself. And you would think that should be easy, but it's actually not. And went to Marsalis. I remember when he came through the Monk Institute when I was a student, saying Monk is the master of the miniature in terms of writing these short form pieces. But, once you hear it, it's Monk. And, one of the, I think, 3 to 5 jazz musicians who made the cover of Time, and just the enduring quality of his legacy. It's just, it's very just inspiring. And I'm playing Monk every chance I can get this year. So thanks for asking me. And let's see what I come up with.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah. Wonderful, wonderful. Thanks so much, Helen, for coming down to Pace Studios today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, the record is called Handful of Keys. It's on the Blue Engine Records label. And we featured Isaiah J. Thompson and Helen Sung today. Wonderful performance, both of you guys. So
you.
great to have you here. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you to Paste.
Bye-bye.